In the previous video, we wrote a class named Books with different properties and methods. The first method is a constructor that allows us to assign default values during instantiation. The second method is add chapter title. It is for adding a title of a chapter. The third method, show chapter title, is for displaying the title of chapters. The next is author. It is a shorthand or an auto-implemented property for getting and setting the author. Next, we override the toString method to return the title and the author. And the last one is the title property, which allows us to assign value to our title and return the value of our title. The last line, we have to change this. It should be title is equals to value. The topic that we are going to cover in this video is inheritance. We will apply inheritance using the book class as the parent class. Okay, so let's start. At the main method, let's separate the previous codes that we wrote and the codes that we will write. Just at the top of our main method, let's add here our new class. And we will name this volume books. Volume books will inherit from our books. So we will write here books. So at this line, we are stating here that the class volume books will inherit the methods and properties that we defined inside of our class books. Now let's create our first member of our book. We will name this volume. So let's create the first private member, and then let's create the property for our volume. And then this time the constructor for our volume books. We will use the same constructor that we used in our books class. So therefore, the way that we will create our constructor for volume books will be slightly different from our books constructor. So we will start by writing here the public, the name of our class, volume books, and then we will write the parameters for our constructor. So we start with the title of our volume book, followed by author, and then followed by chapter, and the last one is the volume. And then as we instantiate the object for our volume books, we'll do the same thing for our books class. And the way to do it is to call the base right after the definition of our constructor for volume books. And then we will specify here the same arguments that we have written for the parameters of our volume books. The next, we have to assign the value of our parameter volume to our private variable volume. But we have to validate if the volume number of our book is 0 or less than 0, because usually volumes of books does not start with 0. So we have to write an if statement here that validates the value of our book. If the volume is less than or equal to 0, we will throw an exception. At this point, we have already created a new class named volume books that inherits from the books class. So this is now the parent class and this is the child class. So we have two members for our volume books. The first member is a constructor method that allows us to instantiate our object and assigning values right after instantiation. The second one is a property that returns the value of our volume. So now let's put this into use. At our main method, just below the console write line, let's create an instance of volume books. And then let's assign title, author, chapter, and volume. At this line, we have already created an instance of volume books with the title The Modern World, and the author is Oxford Encyclopedia with 4 chapters and volume number 1. Now let's try to display the properties that we have inherited from the books class. So let's write the volume 1 or vol 1, and then as you can see, we were able to access the odd chapter, the author, and the title, which were defined inside of our books class. So if we will go back in the definition of our volume books, we did not define the add chapter title, the author, and the show chapter title. But in our main method, using the volume books instance, we can access those methods: add chapter title, author, show chapter title, and title. What we have defined in volume books is just the volume, but we were able to access these members because it inherits from the books class. So let's add some more properties for our volume books. So the last property for our volume books will be about authors. So let's write here public string about authors or about author. We will use the lambda notation for this property so that we can write this property in just one line. When we call the about author, it will display the volume number, the author, and the title of the book. So let's write here the volume number and the author and title of the book. So we have already defined this using the toString in our base class definition. So let's just write here the base class, which refers to the books class, and let's call the toString method, which shows the title and the author of the book. So if we will go back to the definition of our toString from our book class, we stated here that the toString will return the title and the author of the book. So we are calling the overridden toString method from our books class definition. Okay, so let's add some chapters to our volume books. So we have added chapter title, modern science, engineering, medicine, and literature. So this time let's try printing this into our screen by calling the show chapter titles. And then we display the information about books. So let's call the about author. So our about author was defined as property. So therefore, we will use and put this inside of console write line. Okay, so we're having an error here because it was defined a property as if it has a signature of a method. So let's go back to the definition of our about author and let's remove the parentheses of this property. And let's see if the error goes away. Okay, so there you go. So let's try running this application. So the result shows the volume number and the title, The Modern World, with the author, Oxford Encyclopedia. So these are the chapters for this volume. Okay, so let's go back to our Visual Studio. So let's summarize what we did here. So what we did is just we created a new class named Volume Books that inherits the methods and other members inside of our books class. So in other words, all of these members of the books class becomes available inside of our volume books. And in addition to that, we added a new property Number one, that is the volume, a read-only property that returns the number of volume or the value of the volume, and then a lambda notation that returns the details of the author, which basically the volume number of the book and the author and title that was defined under the base class. After inheriting the members of the books class, our volume books was able to access the methods such as add chapter title and show chapter title. So that's all for this video and see you in the next lectures.